Always choose to
We ask the questions.
what is needed in the world.
Pomoćnica je generalnog tajnika UN-a i izvršna direktorica UN-ovima. Aktivno uključena u borbu za okončanje apartheida u zemlji iz koje dolazi, Južne Afrike. Karijeru je posvetila pitanjima ljudskih prava, jednakosti i socijalne pravde. Bila je zastupnica prve demokratske vlade te zemlje. O globalnom naporu da se dostigne ravnopravnost spolova, političkoj volji za promjenu zakona, smanjenju nasilja nad ženama, ali i o većem angažmanu muškaraca i dječaka u borbi za ravnopravnost, govori Phumzile Mlambo-Ngcuka.
Mrs. Mlambo-Ngcuka, welcome to Talk to Al Jazeera.
Thank you very much.
This year, UN Women marks 10 years of its existence. How would you assess actions of the organization until today? Where have you made progress and what is there still to do?
Yes, we're going to be 10 years in 2020, and our mandate is very much strong on changing policies and laws for the world. And we have been supporting member states around the world to change their legislation. We have significantly increased the number of countries that have laws that address violence against women. When we started, in many countries, domestic violence was not even a crime, let alone consent, marital rape. We even had lots of countries, still have, and we're working with them, countries where if you marry your rapist, the rapist goes free. So we have done a lot in supporting the change of legislation, but also in influencing internationally agreed consensus, the biggest of which is the SDGs. The SDGs have gender, center, back and front. We worked very hard during the negotiations in order to make sure that this big agreement that the world was adopting is not gender blind. We advocated for a standalone goal 5 on gender equality, but also to integrate gender across all the goals. I would say that this is probably one of our biggest contribution for gender equality, but of course there still has got to be implementation as well. We have also been working on assisting and driving implementation. In particular, the implementation of the laws is very much affected by norms that perpetuate gender inequality, behavior and the attitudes, for instance, of men with masculinity that is detrimental to gender equality. So we have been behind supporting a movement of men to be engaged and to take responsibility for gender equality. We are not the only ones who are doing that, but the fact that we've participated actively. We have our own campaign called He for She. We've therefore supported and partnered with men's organizations of all ages around the world. We have also branched into working with the young people who haven't always been engaged on matters of gender equality. We've had a dedicated message, just bringing young people to the whole fold of gender equality. The culmination of this work is going to happen next year when we have Generation Equality, which will mark 25, not just 10 years of UN-ovim, but 25 years of Beijing. And at that moment, we are intending to bring the largest ever number of young people to be part of the work that we do. And then, of course, we also are responsible for women, peace and security. We have had both disappointments and as well as progress as far as that is concerned. Greater participation and recognition of the impact of war on women is there. There is a resolution which we support the implementation, but it's not made the difference to the extent to which we would have wanted it to be. So there is work there, but the fact that now rape is recognized as a crime in war, as a weapon of war, is an important advancement, and we continue to advocate for that together with women's organizations around the world.
Thank you. You just mentioned the Beijing Declaration and Platform for Action, and it's the 25th anniversary next year. So why is this declaration still relevant today?
Well, it is relevant because actually it's the only comprehensive agreement in the world that exists that enjoys the support of this many member states. About 198 member states actually supported, and 196 supported this agreement. It is very comprehensive, so it is able to address a number of the critical barriers to gender equality. It also has strong synergies with the SDGs, so it is important that as we implement the Beijing Declaration, we are also advancing the SDGs. I normally say that the Beijing Declaration to women is what the UN Charter is to member states. Without this declaration, which is unifying, we do not have something that we can hold all member states accountable to. And the fact that no member state has opted out of this agreement is actually quite important, because it means that we have a chance to open the doors, to have discussions, to help the activists in these different countries to have something that they can present, something that you can measure and gauge. And that is why we have now this year been evaluating the implementation. We have 150 countries almost that have given us their own review of what has happened. So there isn't an instrument like that in the world right now. That's where we can go across the world and get all the countries to actually compare their progress using exactly the same template across the world.
We live in a world where women are pushing the agendas and succeeding in many fights for rights for women. And on the other side, we see the political pushback and culture where women are still treated as objects. So how can we change those political narratives and policies? For instance, maybe to achieve equal pay.
Well, it is important, for instance, for women to stay organized. The worst thing that could happen is not to have a women's movement. And that is why we strongly support civil society, a robust and an active civil society. We are here right now in Bosnia because we have a conference with civil society. We have 150 delegates from about 75 countries. And as UN Women, we have contacts and relationship with civil society in all countries of the world except 4 small islands. So this is how much we regard civil society as a change maker and as an important role player in changes. I mentioned the issue of men and boys. That also is a very important constituency because they still have a lot of control, they have a lot of power, so you need to co-opt them in the agenda for gender equality so that they can use their power, privilege and authority to create the change that is required.
Do you see that changing? Do you see the men accepting?
Yeah, definitely. There's many more men that participate in our activities. There are many more men who initiate their own program and initiative that are addressing gender equality. You have more men and countries that are regarding themselves as feminists. 10 years ago, I don't think that one would have expected that. And of course, we also need to implement and change good legislation. So the other way in which we have to change this is actually creating institutions for accountability, constitutions that affirm gender equality, laws that affirm gender, not just eliminate the bad one, but also pass the good ones that are reinforcing gender equality. So all of that is part of our ongoing work.
You mentioned why are you here in Bosnia and Herzegovina to attend the gathering of civil society organizations benefiting from grants from the UN Trust Fund to end violence against women. 1 in 3 women worldwide have experienced some form of violence. So how to decrease this violence against women, how to raise awareness and ensure the justice for survivors?
One of the most promising practices in fighting to end violence against women is an approach in which you bring all of the stakeholders to work together, not by chance, but by design. So when you have organizations of survivors, a lot of them would be civil society in any case. When you have your police also working together, when you have your prosecution, when you have your health system documenting, for instance, the injuries of women so that we begin to collect data and trends and we publicize this. When you have all of these institutions working together, and especially the police, make it easier for women to report, and when they report, women to be treated with dignity. It is slow, but we begin to see the change. But all of these institutions have to work together. There's therefore a need for the higher authorities to pull all of these institutions together. Usually in countries where this is working, it is usually the women who go to authorities and help to set it up. When the authorities respond positively, then magic really happens. In countries also where you have more and more women appointed as ministers, as prosecutors, etc., then the response is even much better. So also the participation and the presence of women in decision-making is part of what is helping us to make progress, but progress is slow because we don't have enough countries where all these services are being provided in the same way. And part of what we are seeking to do is to call for this to be a norm in every country, not to be something that some countries, some municipality, some mayor is doing. It must be the norm that happens in every country.
But how to cope with that, let's say in rural areas where institutions are bad or there is no any institution?
But even rural areas have the police. There isn't a country where you don't have these basic. They have some clinic, it may not be perfect, but it is the health prosecution because they know how to arrest thieves and people who do other crimes, who steal cows in rural areas, but they don't arrest a perpetrator of abuse. So you use what you have in that country. In rural areas also traditional authority is important because many rural areas still have traditional authority. So we are also reaching out and working with traditional authority chiefs, etc. In many countries where we're working with rural authorities, for instance, we're seeing the decrease on the violence of female genital mutilation or child marriage, as well as domestic violence, because the authority of the traditional leader is still very strong in rural areas.
Next year will be the 20th anniversary of the United Nations Security Council Resolutions 1325 on women, peace and security. In regards to that, can you tell us what impact did it have and what actions have been made in meeting the goals of this resolution?
Yeah. The critical importance of this resolution is participation of women in peace processes, the consultation of women whenever there's a peace process. We have had a start. We have seen many of the peace agreements now that are being adopted, including some interaction, relevance, and recognition of women. But it is not enough. Women need to sit on the table themselves and be the ones that are concluding agreements. Right now, less than 10% of the agreements that have been signed over the period have involved women. We need women to be mediators. We have trained a lot of women who are mediators, and women do a lot of good jobs. Because of this resolution, we've been able to mobilize resources to invest in the training of women mediators. Women do a lot of mediation at a community level, but women are not being recognized as national and international mediators enough. So that is the next fight.
How to achieve that? How to involve more women?
We have to, member states have to demand that, because these peace processes happen between governments. They are the ones that have to include women. Countries that assist and facilitate peace processes, not necessarily the ones that are fighting, but the ones that are supporting the peace, in the first place, have themselves to have women in their own delegation. Because if they don't have the women in their own delegation, they can't demand the others who are fighting to have women, because those ones are already not very strong gender advocates. So this is the continuing advocacy that, again, is assisted a lot by civil society in different countries. Then there's the increase of the number of women in uniform, women who are military police, women who are peacekeepers, women who are in the security forces of national. We're seeing an increase, but it is slow. So now we're putting together resources. We have a fund called ELSI that is initiated by Canada, and through that fund, we're intending to support countries to increase the number of women that are being trained and being deployed. We are seeing that there is more and more training. The pace is slow. The pace is the problem. And of course, we are also encouraging women to choose this as a career because the presence of women in either peacekeeping or in military forces goes a long way towards making these institutions more user-friendly to women. It decreases the violence within themselves against the women who work there. It decreases the way in which they will neglect violent crimes against women. And if they are peacekeepers, they are much more aware of the issues of gender and crimes against women in the countries where they are deployed. So it's giving us, the resolution is giving us very concrete activities that we can monitor countries' activities and compare if they are making a difference. And of course the investment. There just isn't adequate money that is being put in order to implement this resolution, because everything, costs, to the extent that women also when there is a war, they lose property, they lose land, they lose jobs, they lose economic activity. We also are pushing for much more increase. There is small activities that are going on, but it's not enough. You need women to get reparations. You need women to restore their land. You need policies that would make sure that women also, in terms of custody of children, inheritance, all of those are issues that we are fighting and tackling using this piece of legislation. And we do want constantly to discuss this so that we can expose the challenges, but also, be complementary when countries do the right thing.
Which country is leading the gender equality at the moment in the world? And can we see some examples and take it and then apply it to the rest of the world?
Yeah. Let me just say that there is no country that has achieved gender equality yet. So that is a bit sad. But that said, you have Iceland is the top country in terms of gender equality, but even Iceland has some of the really big barriers to gender equality. Violence against women is still a problem. They don't have wage equality, even though they are fighting very hard for it. Participation of women is not completely on par with that of men. Stereotypes against women in the media and so on, even though they are fighting against them. So you still have these kinds of problems. But on the positive side, some of the positive trends and action that must be taken that help to advance gender equality, it is from childcare. That is one of the biggest interveners, because childcare and motherhood is where many women get to be left behind by their peers. They have to decide to give up participation in the labor market because of having to look after children, as well as to look after older people in the family or disabled people. Wherever there is a burden of care in the household, in most countries, that still falls disproportionately on women. The lack of parental leave in many countries that does not create a platform that is compulsory for men to also have the privilege of being a father and a parent is something that, when it happens, facilitates and fast tracks gender equality. And of course, the training of people who are responsible for public institutions, be they judges, be they magistrates, all of those are crucial in order to set the tone that makes gender equality possible in many countries. Access to education is also very important, ensuring that both girls and boys have got enough opportunity, but also making it compulsory to represent, to have women represented at senior levels, in boards, etc. That also is important because girls graduate at the same rate as men these days at university, but you don't have as many girls who are managing institutions proportional to the number of girls that are coming out of university. So not unless you force companies not to be prejudiced towards women as workers and employees and not promote them, then you leave the girls and the young women behind.
Under the apartheid regime in South Africa, you were part of student uprising. What was it like to be a woman in such important event in history, considering your political role then?
Fortunately that in South Africa, women were very active in the resistance and in the struggle. So it was good to always have other women that you were part of the struggle with, as well as the fact that at least at a leadership level, our male colleagues were much more progressive, even though within our struggles you also had a lot of patriarchy and men who discriminated and did not believe in gender equality. The fact that you had leaders such as Nelson Mandela or Oliver Tambo who were intolerant to gender inequality, who demanded gender equality, helped to set the tone as an organization. And the lesson from that is that it is important that the leaders stand up, that they demand and that they follow through when it comes into advancing gender equality. But it's also important for a woman not to take no for an answer, to really assert yourself always.
Nelson Mandela said that no nation can be fully free until women are emancipated.
Amen.
Yes, feels like he was a feminist. So how important is for men to understand that they should support achieving gender equality more actively and be more involved in making decisions and making policies?
Look, whether we are a grassroots man, we are a man of privilege and power, it is important to understand and to support gender equality. If you think of the many girls that are affected by child marriage, if fathers, brothers, peers were to say, we don't want to be marrying children, I don't want my child to marry an older person, that's a big game changer because they have such influence within family and households. And that can only happen if men understand the importance of gender equality. If you think of violence against women, this whole gender thing is a man's problem. Frankly, it's men who should be in the street fighting, who should be running the likes of UN-ovim and making a difference, because this is the problem that they overwhelmingly are responsible for. So you cannot let them not take the responsibility for making a difference and making about a change. So if it comes to violence against women, if men, they talk to each other about not beating up women, that the men that are good must not be bystanders and watch the bad man and say, I'm not a bad guy, that one is a bad guy. It doesn't help. Stop the bad guy. Do something about it. So you actually need men to take the responsibility to stop the crimes that are being committed against women. If you think about who is the law enforcement, who is the police, it is the men. They have to take the responsibility to make an institution that is supposed to protect women who are being beaten up by other men. So you know, it is such an important constituency to have in place, to take responsibility, and being a bystander is not good enough. It only takes good men to do nothing for the world to get worse.
Gender equality is something that needs to be achieved on global level. How do you imagine the ideal state where gender equality is actually achieved, and how far are we from that point?
We can measure the levels of gender equality just by some basic things like pay equality. That is a measurement of how far you have come. The actual presence of women in decision-making bodies, that is a concrete measurement that can tell you where women in cabinets, we're seeing an increase, but slowly, of countries that have got women and men that are equal, 50-50 represented in their cabinet. That is a concrete measure. But there's many more countries that need to achieve that, because just appointing women to cabinet is one of the relatively easy thing to do, because just the head of state has to make a decision, and that goes a long way towards creating more role models and people that in most cases would try and advance gender equality in their post. Not always, but most of the time, women will try and advance gender equality. So that is another concrete measure to measure. And women's health, you know, just the health and well-being of women is also an indicator of gender equality. The fact that you decrease maternal deaths, women who die just because they're having a baby, when there is no reason for women to die like that, the decrease of the number of women who die in this situation, that is gender equality. So there are really concrete ways. The reduction of the burden of care, the number of women who are the sole people responsibility for looking after the unpaid care work in the family, that probably more than anything else is the biggest measure to measure gender equality. So we can direct our energy towards changing these specific areas.
Thank you so much for being a guest of Al Jazeera.
Yeah, thanks.
We ask the questions.
What is needed in the world?